Here we have lesson 17, decimals and fractions. Our goal is I will be able to relate decimal and fraction multiplications. I'm supposed to say multiplication. All right, ooh la la. Here we go. We are not going to do the review. Here's our first problem. Go ahead. 0.1 times 4. Okay? So the way we're going to read it, right, with a decimal is 1/10. Our 1 is in the tenths place, right? So we read it as 1/10 times 4. Or remember our all-important of. Wow, that's really thick. Our all-important of, right? 1/10 of 4. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put this into a multiplication sentence using a fraction. So 1/10. How do you write 1/10 as a fraction? You put 1 over 10. Okay, so 1/10 as a fraction is this, and 1/10 as a decimal is this. It's the same. Okay, so I'm going to keep my 4 the same. All right, so we can go ahead and multiply just like normal, right? I'd have 1 times 4 is 4 over 10. Now, if you notice, when you read this out loud, 4/10, you can show it as a decimal as well. 4/10 looks like 0.4. Okay, they're the same. 4/10 as a fraction and 4/10 as a decimal. Okay, now the reason why we can put the 4 into the tenths place here is because we are talking about tenths. Okay, we cannot do this with 1/2, right? We don't have halves. Okay, that's not a place value. We can only do it because we have tenths. All right, so I'm going to show it on a place value chart. I already have it set it up here. We have nothing in the ones. Okay, and we have 1/10. Okay, so what's happening? I'm just putting my decimal here. What's happening here is I'm multiplying by 4, right? So 1 times 4, and then I would get 0.4. Same thing. All right, let's move to our next problem. So here on our first one, we had 1/10 times 4. What about 1/100th of 4? Okay, so if you notice, we now move to the next place value behind tenths. All right, and we still have 1 times 4. It's still 4. So our answer would be 4/100ths, right? We would write it as 0 and our decimal 0.4. And our 4 is then in the hundredths place. We can do the same thing with thousandths, okay? Because we go tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So then we would have 4 thousandths, 4 over 1,000, or you could write it as a decimal as 0.004. All right? They mean the same thing. Let's go to this one. Now we're going to multiply a decimal times a decimal, okay? So once again, I'm going to rewrite it as a fraction, just like I did the last one. Okay, so 1/10 looks like 1 over 10 as a decimal, sorry, as a fraction. I'm going to multiply it, and I'm going to do 1/10 again. All right, we can easily multiply this, and we'll get 1 over 100. Okay, now I can use my area model to help me solve this. And, well, I mean, we've already solved it, I guess, to help us prove it. All right, so I'm going to use a highlighter. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shade 1/10. All right, I've already pre-made this, so I'm just going to shade 1/10. All right, now I'm going to change colors. Let's go red so it'll be really easy to see. And I'm going to make it a little bigger. And I'm going to go ahead and shade 1 more tenth. Oh my gosh, that's perfect. Okay. Right, so I look at my double shaded one. I only have 1 that's double shaded. And altogether, I have 10 going this way. I have 10 going down. I know 10 times 10 is 100. And so there's my answer. Okay? That's how you can visually look at this. Okay, so it's all the same, it's just in a different way of writing it. We're in decimals now, but we still know how to do this by converting. Okay, so I'm going to look at 2/10 times 1/10. All right, so we're going to look at our place value chart here. Okay, we have our tens, we have our ones, and we have our tenths. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and show, let's show the first one, 2/10. All right, so here's my 2, my decimal, or sorry, that was a 0, and here's my decimal, and here's 2. Okay, and we're going to multiply it by 1/10. All right, real quick, I'm going to write the multiplication question down here, or multiplication problem. 2/10 times 1/10. Now, when we're multiplying fractions by fractions, okay, I think you guys have realized the pattern, right? 2 times 1, 10 times 10, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show that here on my place value chart. So I ended at tenths here, but I actually need to keep going, right? Into my hundredths. I'm just going to put an H there, you know what I mean. Right? So if I multiply by 1/10, I'm going to take my 0 and I'm going to multiply by 1/10. Why am I going to the right? I'm going to the right because we're getting smaller, right? We're multiplying by a fraction. We're getting smaller. So my 0 goes here, and my 2, I multiply that also by 1/10, and I put it here. And so my answer becomes, I'm going to put it up here, 0.02. All right, let's check that down here with our fractions. 2 times 1 is 2 over 100. All right, so if I wanted to write it as a fraction, this is how I would write it, 2/10, or I could write it as 2 hundredths and 2 hundredths up here. They're the same, it's just in different forms. Now, if you notice, we could definitely simplify this. Okay, but if I simplify it, we'll get 1/50th, but I won't be able to easily turn it into a decimal like this because we don't have the place value of 50ths. All right, we only have hundredths. So if our fraction is hundredths, then we can put it into a decimal. All right, so we're going to look at this one a little bit different just because now we're working with a decimal that has a whole number, right? The ones we've done before this have all been 0 point something. This one is now involving a whole number. All right, so I'm going to show it on the place value chart first, and then we'll look at the multiplication at the end. So I'm going to start with my ones. I have my 1.2, all right, and I multiply it by 1/10, okay? So because we're getting smaller, we need to go to the right, and we only move it to one place value because it's 1/10, right? We only move it once. All right, I'm going to extend this. I'm going to show my hundredths. Okay, so I multiply my 1 by 1/10. My 1 moves into the tenths now, and I multiply my 2, and now that becomes a 2 in the hundredths place, and there's a 0 here. So my answer is going to be 12 hundredths. All right, let's go ahead and check that with our multiplication down here. Now, we're not going to make it into a mixed number, okay? We're going to go ahead and just keep it as an improper fraction. So I'm going to put 12 over 10. All right, if I put it into a mixed number, we could still get to the answer, but I want to look at it this way first. So if you notice, 1.2 is the same as 12 over 10, right? You would get 1 and 2/10, which is exactly what this is, okay? So I'm going to leave that, and then I'm going to multiply it by 1/10. All right, and then I'm going to end up with 12 times 1 is 12, and then 10 times 10 is 100, okay? 12 hundredths looks exactly like this as a decimal. They are the same. Okay, let's go to this one. So we've been working in tenths. We worked with a number that had a whole number, but now let's look at if I'm multiplying something by tenths and hundredths. Let's see what happens. All right, so we're going to start with the multiplication part first, and then we'll go to our place value chart. So I have 1/10, and I'm going to multiply by 100. All right, now we're going to go ahead and multiply our numerators. 1 times 1 is 1. So we have 1 over, and then I'm going to multiply 100 times 10. This is going to give me 1,000. All right, 1,000th with a TH. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, extend here. So I'm actually going to have to go 2 more place values behind. Here's my hundredths, and here's my thousandths. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first number that I have here, 1/10. All right, nothing in the ones, and I have a 1 in the 10th place. All right, now I'm multiplying by 1/100th, okay? We already determined that if we're multiplying by 1/10, we go backwards by 1. All right, but now we're multiplying by hundredths, so we need to go backwards by 2. Hopefully that's what you were thinking. All right, so we're going to move over a 0. There's 1, and then there's 2. My 0 goes here. And same thing with the 1. 1 and 2, and there's the bell. All right, so a 0 comes here. Remember, it has to hold the place, and our decimal will be here. So our answer is 1,000th, 0.001. All right. So do you see how multiplying with fractions and multiplying with decimals will still give us the same answer? All right, 2 more. Let's go ahead and show this as a fraction. We'll multiply, and if we're not going to do the place value chart, but go ahead and visualize it so that you still see it in your head what's going on place value wise. All right, so I'm going to show 1.5 as a fraction. All right, I'm not going to do a mixed number. I'm going to do the improper fraction. So I'm going to do 15 over 10. All right, I have 15 tenths, which is 15 tenths. It's the same thing. And then I'm going to multiply by 1 over 100. All right. Let's go ahead and multiply 15 times 1, and I'm going to get 15. And then I'm going to multiply 10 times 100, all right? And I'll get 1,000. So there's my answer. I'm not going to simplify it because if I do, I'm not going to get my place value of thousands. I'm going to go ahead and go straight to my decimal from here. All right? So the 5, remember, has to be, the last number has to be in the place value that you're saying. So the 5 has to be in the thousandths place. All right? So our 1 is in the hundreds and our 5 is in the thousandths. And there's our answer. All right, here's our last one. Here's a multiplication problem, obviously, but this is a whole number times a decimal, okay? So I'm going to rewrite it with a fraction. So there's 7 times, and I'm going to go 2 over 10. Okay? Now, remember, you can multiply it like this, but remember, you can also look at it like this, maybe to help you remember how to multiply by a whole number, right? 7 times 2 is the numerator, and then your denominator stays the same when you're working with whole numbers, okay? So 7 times 2 is 14, okay? Now this is a little bit different from what we did before because we now have a number on top that's bigger than our denominator, okay? We can put it as a decimal. So our 4 is going to be in the tenths place. So I'm going to put my 4 in the tenths. Here's my decimal to show that the 4 is in the tenths, and I'm going to put my 1 in the ones place. All right, so I have 14 tenths here, and I have 14 tenths there. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Go ahead, take the quiz, and I'll see you in the morning.